certainly is clear that my campaign is focused on the Republicans. That's who I talk about. That's who I criticize because I think they've earned it.
It is what America has been wishing for, a warmer, cozier, nicer, fuzzier Hillary Clinton. And pay no attention to the fact Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are nibbling away at Hillary's polling numbers. Just a coincidence that the Clinton campaign has chosen this time to reset their campaign strategy and seek to cozy up to the American voter. Move along, they will say. Nothing to see here. Of course, we know better. Time to loose the political animal for the daily feasting. Welcome back to former head of FEMA, now afternoon radio talker on 630 KHOW in Denver, Colorado, Michael Brown, joined by Brendan Bordelon, political reporter for the National Review Online, and who has been heavy of late on coverage of the aforementioned Mrs. Clinton. Gentlemen, I thank you both for joining us. And Brendan, seeing as you are now first-timer here, let's go ahead and hit you first right out of the box. New numbers out from Monmouth University. The new poll numbers show that Mrs. Clinton has a 42% lead. 42% of the people like her. But then Joe Biden, 22, Bernie Sanders, 20. That's a 12-point drop. It's still a huge margin of 20%, but that is a 12-point drop from the last poll. Brendan, is it not time for Mrs. Clinton to realize that there are a lot of people in America who, quite frankly, simply don't like her?
I think it's important to look at these polls. Sorry about that. Look at these polls and see how the trend line goes. It's not that great a thing to see how Hillary Clinton has a huge lead in the polls, even if it is 12 points, 20 points. What you see is throughout this summer, her support has wilted. It's gone down significantly. Like you said, it's been a 20-point drop. And I think if that trend line continues, that's going to end up being something extremely damaging for her going forward.
Michael, it's not necessarily even Bernie Sanders this time. This time it's Joe Biden getting into the race, who's actually taken a lot of her numbers away. Plus, if you put that to the one side here, that a second review says that there was indeed classified information in her email, regardless of how many times Mrs. Clinton says, "Go away, you bother me, young man." We still have to get back to all this. It's right in her face. And don't you think that the American public are just sick and tired of just being treated like 2-year-olds by Mrs. Clinton?
Well, I think they're only sick and tired of being treated like 2-year-olds. But back to Brendan's point, that trend line keeps going down. And so far, she's not suffered from any attacks from Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden. Imagine if Bernie, in one of his, he starts to put the burn on to Hillary about some of her stuff. I think that trend line starts pointing downward even quicker. But to your point about the email, I think everyone's sick of the email, but I think I think the American people understand that it's the Clintons being Clintons, thinking they're above the law and that they can get by with this stuff. And call me naive, but I keep thinking, maybe I'm just dreaming here, that eventually the FBI is going to come out and say, you know what, we really have found criminal wrongdoing. I mean, after all, it is the FBI investigating, and they don't investigate political issues, they investigate criminal issues. So we'll see what happens.
All right, now let's talk about the other guy. Brendan, let's look back. A Labor Day event in Pittsburgh, Vice President Joe Biden greeted by the crowd, and here it was. They all want him to get into the presidential race. Here's what it sounded like. So, Brendan, do you think there's a realization in the Clinton camp, especially now with this whole resetting the campaign, that Joe Biden is real? They better start watching him. I still don't think Joe Biden is going to get into the race, but do you think there is finally a little fear in the Clintons' eyes?
Well, let's speak to your first. I was with you until this weekend, actually. I thought Biden's son, does he really want to go through this slog, the day in, day out attacks after losing his son just a few months ago? When you look at that video today, though, Biden's reaction to that crowd, it was like old Uncle Joe again. He was smiling, he was happy, he was out there kissing babies, shaking hands. He had a rabble-rousing speech. I think the fire may be back in Joe Biden, and I think that's what the Hillary camp should be afraid of. Joe Biden is an incredibly effective campaigner. He blows Hillary out of the water. I mean, she's great on policy, you could argue, but when it comes to just going out and kissing babies, shaking hands, meeting people, she doesn't really have her husband's flair for that. Biden has that in spades. He can also connect with the working class in a way that Clinton really can't.
He is the guy that you want to have a beer with, no doubt about it. Exactly. Michael, let's get to you here. Bruce Bartlett has worked for a lot of Republican office holders, and this one made me sit back and look. In the Washington Post, he writes, Donald Trump does not need Latino voters to win. All he has to do is get black voters to jump over from Democrat and become Republican. Michael, I read the article, must have been 3 or 4 times, and I'm trying to say, really? It's just that easy? How could we have been so foolish?
Well, I think we continue to look, Bruce is a friend of mine, and I'll tell you that I think what Bruce is saying here, I hope this is what he's saying here. We need to quit listening to the GOP consultant class who keeps telling us we've got to squeeze off a little here and a little there. We need to first secure the base. And I think what the other Republican candidates ought to be worried about is that Donald Trump, look, I don't think Donald Trump's a conservative by any means, but he is resonating, and I think he's tapping into the base. And if he taps into the base and peels off any blacks, peels off any Latinos, then the cattle door is the barn door is wide open, and Lord knows what will happen after that.
I think, but there's an awful lot of ifs in there, and you will agree with me on that.
Tons of ifs, right.
Tons of ifs if he can get a lot of these things to happen. Brendan, I only got 15 seconds left. Do you think that Bartlett's got a point?
Yeah, I think he's got a point. I think nobody really knows where this Trump train is going at this point. A lot of people are saying now Ben Carson might come up in the fall. We'll see what happens.
All right. Michael Brown, Brendan Bordelon, we thank you both for taking time to go ahead, sit as the animal, and decide to chew into what is now just another day at the polls. Gentlemen, we'll talk to you both real soon. Now, let's go ahead and remind everybody here, let's talk about Ben Carson. If you want to learn more about Ben Carson, the fact that he is sneaking up on Donald Trump in the polls, why that just indeed might be, here's your chance to learn more about the doctor. Get a copy of his book, One Nation. Call 1-800-655-7567 or go to Newsmax.com/Ben for your free offer to get your copy of One Nation. Stay with us. What does Colin Powell know? Next on The Hardline.